Donald Trump obviously wants to pitch himself as this peacemaker, and sometimes when the leaders will go in their own way, there is a frustration. But generally speaking, I think he has more sway here.
So he came for the golf and he stayed for the trade deal. While President Trump's visit to Turnberry in Scotland was billed as a personal visit, the man who really, really likes to pride himself and prove himself on his deal making has done exactly that. He's announced a deal between the EU and the US. Not one, of course, for understatement. President Trump declared it was the biggest deal ever made. Our own Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, is on his way to meet the President in Scotland this morning. The Times says he'll use the occasion to press Donald Trump to do more on Gaza. But he might also want to make a little progress on our own trade deal, which has a few blanks to still fill in. Scotch whisky and steel might be discussed. The Times Washington editor, Katy Balls, is also on the President's trip and joins us this morning. Hi, Katy.
Hello.
Great to speak to you. So shall we start with this EU deal? It's a big agreement. There's lots of big numbers involved. There is still some detail to fill in, I think. But in terms of what's been secured here, Trump will claim victory. Liberation Day has really yielded this as a result. Is he right? Does he have a point?
Well, I think when you look at this deal, it does feel as though the US has a few reasons to be quite happy with it, and the EU side perhaps less so. And you've already seen some in Brussels, questioning how good this deal is. Ultimately, I think with that tariff deadline looming and the talk from the Trade Secretary of the US and others saying there would be no more extensions if you didn't come to the table, they were going to slap tariffs on and difficult decisions were coming. I think that has really focused minds and clearly made Ursula von der Leyen think it was best to cut a deal. And then you look at some of the parts of the deal. So, for example, the 15% tariff on most goods entering the US from Europe. Now, that is half of what Donald Trump had threatened. He had been talking about 30%. Of course, the UK has tariffs of 10% within the UK-US deal. And at the time, there were reports that Europeans didn't think it was a very good deal. They are now on a higher rate. So I think that the feeling amongst Donald Trump's team is one where they think they have a deal and they're very happy with it. I think there's some relief on the EU side, but when you look at this, they've had to give quite a bit.
Interesting. So with all of that in mind, Katy, should we be looking out for progress on the UK-US trade deal today? Is that kind of up for discussion?
Yeah, we know it's one of the topics that they'll be talking about. I think that when you speak to figures on the UK side, they will suggest, there's room to talk, perhaps to push further for things and to action parts. Because, of course, we had the scenes in the Oval Office, quite a long time ago now, several months ago, whereby Donald Trump and Keir Starmer were both talking up this deal, but it didn't come into effect immediately. It was an early stage announcement, and therefore putting the meat on the bones has been a factor. And when it comes to, for example, steel tariffs, there's a real focus in number 10 to try and make sure that these are brought in and also they're as beneficial as they can be to the industry. I think on the US side, they think the deal is done. They can talk about it, but I don't think there's much appetite to reopen things. So I think there's probably a delicate dance when it comes to the trade discussions that Keir Starmer wants to have and how much he can really mould or shape things at this point.
Perhaps then the headlines from today will be focused on Gaza, which has very much been a conversation over the weekend, particularly as pictures emerged from Gaza of the real humanitarian crisis that appears to be unfolding there and really taking a grip of women, children and others who live in Gaza. Talk to us a little about where we often refer, don't we, to the diplomatic tightrope that's in this situation that Starmer's going to have to walk. He's got on one side Emmanuel Macron saying that France will go ahead and recognise a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly. He's got Donald Trump saying, that's kind of performative nonsense from Macron. Starmer says it's a question of when, not if. He's juggling quite a lot when it comes to Gaza today.
He is, and I think what will be interesting is what line does he take? Because we're, of course, hearing from 10 Downing Street that Keir Starmer plans to raise the issue of Gaza, Palestine, Israel in this meeting. But so far, the suggestion has been about pushing for a permanent ceasefire. Israel's, we can be talking about a brief pause at least. So I think there's a difference clearly between talking about pushing for a ceasefire. Now, that's something that the US side have been pushing for and, for some time at various points, and talking about recognising Palestine as the statehood of Palestine. So does he go for the latter? if he were to go for the latter, then I think it's it'll be interesting to see what Donald Trump's response is, because as you say, Emmanuel Macron said this. The comments were put to the president by traveling hacks, and he was he said, "Oh, I like Macron. Effectively, I like Macron. He's a good guy, but thankfully on this, he's completely irrelevant." And therefore, I was it's just not word for word, but
No,
summation.
that's the gist, isn't it? Exactly.
Exactly, and therefore, I wonder if he might take a similar view when it comes to the UK on this issue. Also, of course, let's see if Ukraine comes up. It has felt in recent weeks as though Trump has been hardening his stance against Russia and Putin, something which obviously the EU leaders would be quite happy to see if that is the case.
Yeah, indeed. I think as well, one of the other parts of the kind of the Gaza question is how much Starmer has influence in this moment. We've all kind of come to terms, have we not, Katie, with the idea that it is Trump who is the kind of the ally decision maker to Netanyahu, that Netanyahu will carry on regardless of what Emmanuel Macron or indeed Sir Keir Starmer says, but Trump may have some more influence.
Yes, exactly. And I think that at times, I think every leader has at times frustrated the White House when, they won't quite do. Donald Trump obviously wants to pitch himself as this peacemaker. And sometimes when the leaders will go in their own way, there is a frustration. But generally speaking, I think he has more sway here. We know that clearly in terms of their relationship, he has sway. And the Israeli leader obviously visited the White House a few weeks ago. Also, that joint action between the US and Israel in Iran. I think, there are lots of reasons that Israel pays attention to America. And therefore, if Trump pushes for something, it's going to have a higher likelihood than EU leaders Keir Starmer doing it when it
Yeah.
comes to that relationship.
There is a question in all of this, whether it's trade, whether it's foreign relations and the situation in Gaza, whether Trump just simply always gets what he wants. That is the world we are living in. And that's something perhaps we'll consider on the programme as well today. I guess the other part of this, Katie, is his trip will... well, hang on, he's got today and tomorrow, doesn't he? He'll be visiting Aberdeenshire, I think, the next couple of days. There is a question as to what awaits Trump when he gets home as well. Last week we were talking a lot about the Epstein files, and that feels like something that hasn't necessarily gone away, even if there's been a few days' worth of distraction.
No, and of course, if you look at actually actions the White House have taken on this and the Department of Justice, there is movement. So there's been a story that has been a headache for Donald Trump, but also at the same time, there's now obviously talk of meetings with Ghislaine Maxwell coming from the department, so parts of the administration, and a general effort to see what files they can release. Now, the Department of Justice did petition try and release some files. A judge said no. So what are the next steps going to be? And there's worth pointing out we are now heading in DC, though I'm currently in Scotland, into a very hot summer, and you have a situation where Congress is not going to be sitting. So things can be happening, but it's going to be largely, I think, for now at least, in control of the administration as to the steps they want to take. Before, of course, you have congressmen and senators coming back in September, where they will have their views and could, of course, try and force some tricks to get the agenda moving in their own way.
Yeah.